Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have a pile of bones. During the 19th century, bison were hunted so much that they were actually quite close to being extinct, and by the mid-1880s there were only a few hundred left. Hides were prepared and then shipped off so that they could be made into leather, but usually the bones, or really anything other than the hide, was just left to decay, as it wasn't useful to the hunters. The hunting of bison was so widespread and overwhelming that even the US Army sanctioned and endorsed the slaughter of herds of bison. The federal government was promoting it for a variety of reasons, including to lessen a food and materials source for the indigenous peoples. The US government was even paying a bounty for each bison skull, and military commanders were ordering troops to kill bison, not for them to eat, but just so that the indigenous couldn't. That story, coupled with the sheer mass amounts of skulls seen in this photo, is exactly what makes it so exceptionally unsettling. These bones would likely be on their way to become fertilizer. In our number 9 spot today, we have the great manta. In 1933, a New York silk manufacturer named A.L. Kahn was on a nice little vacation in Florida when he honestly accidentally caught something remarkable. His anchor line, by mistake, caught onto a giant manta ray. After a struggle and several hours, Kahn was able to get this actually enormous fish ashore. This monster was somewhere between 5,000 to 6,000 pounds and was 20 feet and 5 inches in width. For reference, there are other giant manta rays, but they usually grow to be around 13 to 14 feet wide, not 20 and a half. This photo is showing a taxidermy version of the fish, which Kahn used to bring around to exhibitions to show off his accidental catch. In an article from the December 10th, 1933 issue of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch's Sunday magazine, Kahn is quoted as saying, quote, "Fishing is a lot of fun when you catch the fish. And sometimes it's fun even when you don't, but when the fish catches you." In our number 8 spot today, we have the swimsuits. This is a photo that comes to us from the 1920s, and it shows just one of the many extremely important jobs that the, quote, beach patrol of the day had. Yes, they went around measuring the length between a woman's knee and the bottom of her swimsuit because God forbid she showed too much leg at the beach. In the 1920s, bathing suits began to become something that went through changes and fads, and of course this evolution to more form-fitting, less material swimwear caused a lot of controversy in the day. There were then strict dress codes implemented at places like resorts and country clubs, and even directors of public beaches had them, thus the beach patrol. There were fines for violations and sometimes even imprisonment. In the Washington Post in 1907, there was a photo of 2 women in bathing suits being escorted by an officer with a caption, quote, "These apologies for skirts endanger the morals of the children. The police must interfere and stop the outrageous proceedings." In most cases, these sorts of rules really only affected the women of the time, and sometimes women were even required to wear stockings under their bathing suits. I'm just saying, with my attitude, I would have not done well in the 1920s. There was even one beach who had a tailor go around and stitch up swimsuits that they felt weren't up to the dress code. In our number 7 spot today, we have the advertisement. This is a photo that comes to us from a time of World War II, and it shows a terrifying ad. The sign reads, "These men didn't take their atabrine," and at first I had absolutely no idea what that was. Turns out atabrine is the first synthetic form of quinine, which was used by the US military to fight malaria in the South Pacific during the war. It is estimated that as many as 2/3 of the troop fell ill with malaria. This sign is said to have been posted outside of a military hospital in New Guinea and was meant to serve as a warning for those who didn't take the medicine, warning that the skulls on top would be the fate that awaited them. Perhaps a little dark, but creative and likely effective nonetheless. At the very least, the ad is quite clear. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Ferris Wheel of Hate. This is a photo that, honestly, I don't even know what to say about it. It's gross, it's weird, it's upsetting, and it's honestly just so stupid. For a long time this photo went under the radar as the photographer who took it didn't share it with the paper, but when it resurfaced 65 years later, it spread like wildfire, and for a lot different reasons than it would have back then, thankfully, but it also reveals some of those blind spots in history that we have. This photo comes from April of 1926, and it shows some members of the KKK just enjoying a day at an amusement park with many of them on a Ferris wheel. I wish this was one of those times where something went horribly wrong and the whole thing came crashing down, but unfortunately that likely isn't what happened on this day, and now we just have this relic that shows us the insane power and influence that this hate group had during this time. While this photo is very dark, it's an important part of history to remember. Also, before we move on, let's just take a second to talk about how stupid they all look. Like, we gotta wear our little matching outfits to the Ferris wheel. In our number 5 spot today, we have early plastic surgery. This photo, well, rather these two photos side by side, show a man named Walter Yeo, and he was the first person to receive the, at the time advanced, plastic surgery procedure called the skin flap. Sounds disgusting. He received this procedure in 1917, and at the time, since it was so advanced, it was only used for very serious things, like for someone who was wounded in battle, which is exactly what had happened to Walter. He was a soldier in the Battle of Jutland during the First World War. Walter was actually a sailor, and he was manning the guns aboard the HMS Warspite, and while doing this, he sustained facial injuries that included the loss of his upper and lower eyelids. In the end, he needed a couple more operations, but he was even able to return to service for a little while before being medically discharged. After this, he lived his life until he reached the age of 70 years old. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Hindenburg. This is a photo that was taken during what is now known as the Hindenburg disaster. It is commonly known that blimps, or these kinds of floating airships, use helium in them to float through the air, and it's important to note that this helium isn't the choice because it's the only option, but rather it's one of the safest options because it isn't extremely volatile. Because of a US ban on the exportation of helium at the time, i.e. the Helium Control Act of 1925, although the Hindenburg was designed to use helium, because of a lack of it available, on the day of the Hindenburg disaster, the much more flammable hydrogen was used instead. This led to a complete disaster. When the Hindenburg floated off on May 6, 1937, it disastrously caught fire during its flight with 97 people on board. Sadly, due to the fire, there were 35 casualties on board the flight that day. It is an absolutely horrendous situation, but it does teach us all a very valuable lesson. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Falls. This is a photo of Annie Edison Taylor when she was 63 years old in 1901. The barrel she is posing beside is the one that she sealed herself up inside of to then become the first person to survive a trip over Niagara Falls. Why did she do this? Well, for money, of course. Annie was widowed and spent a lot of time bouncing between different jobs, but after having been burned out of her home and losing money that she had invested with a clergyman, she ended up sadly falling on some hard times, and this is what led her to the Falls. The barrel she used was custom made, and it was constructed of oak and iron and padded with a mattress. It wasn't exactly easy to get this whole plan set up, and it ended up being delayed several times, mostly because people were afraid to be a part of this mission that was likely sending Annie to her death, and I truly don't blame them at all. On October 24th, 1901, her 63rd birthday, Annie climbed in the barrel with her heart-shaped pillow and was set adrift. The river currents carried the barrel over the Canadian Horseshoe Falls, and rescuers reached her barrel shortly after. She was alive and escaped with little to no injuries aside from a gash on her head. While her survival is great news, it's important to include what Annie had to say about the entire situation after, which was, quote, "If it was with my dying breath, I would caution anyone against attempting the feat. I would sooner walk up to the mouth of a cannon knowing it was going to blow me to pieces than make another trip over the falls." So don't try this at home, is what she's saying. In our number 2 spot today, we have War is Hell. This is a photo of a soldier that was taken during the Vietnam War. The soldier has a hand-scribed note on their helmet that reads, quote, "War is hell," and I truly cannot even imagine. In 1954, the US entered the war to support South Vietnam against the regime in North Vietnam, as well as their allies in the South. This war lasted for 2 decades, and it claimed more than 3 million lives, mostly those of Vietnamese civilians. There are many powerful, disturbing, and unsettling photos from this war, many of which I would consider too graphic to put here on YouTube. There is something about the brightness of the eyes of the soldier that sits in contrast with the rest of this dark photo that really make it stand out. For a while, the identity of this soldier was left a mystery, but after some years, Fran Chafin Morrison revealed that the soldier was her late husband, Larry Wayne Chaffin. Larry served for a year in the 173rd Brigade, beginning in May 1965, and when this photo was taken, he was just 19 years old. He did end up being discharged from the army and was able to return home to his wife. He sadly ended up passing away at the young age of 39, thought to be because of complications due to the exposure to Agent Orange, but his legacy has lived on. There's an incredible photo of his grandson who looks strikingly similar to his grandfather, holding this exact portrait. In our number 1 spot today, we have the cross. This photo comes to us from 1960 and it shows Martin Luther King Jr. along with his infant son at the time removing a cross that had been burnt on his front lawn. This photo is important and powerful for quite a few reasons. Firstly, it's just a glimpse into what Mr. King would have dealt with every single day for many years. It is clear by his almost nonchalant look that this isn't something new or surprising. It's also important to note, however, that this look isn't one of acceptance or content, or of someone who is unbothered, but instead it's the look of someone who continually chooses to rise above, someone who chooses to remain calm and cool in the face of adversity. The leader of a movement. As a Reddit user, 1945 Best Year put so well, quote, "Here he's a father, a man with a family whose lives are being threatened. He isn't hysterical or obviously afraid, and his towering figure literally rooting out the undesirable foe has been done in any number of war propaganda posters, but he's still sympathetic. He deserves the security of knowing that home will be safe for his children like anybody else."
Number 10, the tonsil guillotine. I got my tonsils taken out when I was younger. I have no idea why. Everyone else has theirs, apparently, in the office, but comment down below if you still have your tonsils, because now I want to know, what's the ratio? Are you looking to get rid of your tonsils with one swift click? Oh boy. If this were the 1860s, the tonsil guillotine would have been your first and, well, your only option. And yes, it's as bad as it sounds. The tonsil guillotine. Oh, here we go. It looks like that one pair of tongs under the barbecue that nobody wants to use. Like that rusty surgical pair of tongs. They're like, ugh, what's that? This rusty surgical instrument was essentially a pair of tongs, but on the inside there was a curved blade that was placed around the tonsil, and then it was closed with one little click, cutting the tissue. Ideally cutting the tissue off easily. The tonsil guillotine was a controversial tool, obviously. It was often used without anesthesia and had a high risk of complications such as excessive bleeding, infection, and damage to surrounding tissue. Because yeah, obviously, our old rusty tool from the 8th century. Yeah, a rusty tool from the Victorian era. I'm like, yeah, don't put this in your mouth, please. As more modern surgical techniques and, of course, anesthetics became available, the use of the tonsil guillotine declined. Thank all of the gods for that. It's no longer used in modern medical practice. Oh, that's horrible. How do they do it when you're younger? I guess they just kind of, well, scissors, I guess. It's not better. It's definitely not better. Number 9, before and after. We'll do a palate cleanser after that last one because, well, that's grossing me out. There we go. This next one here, this is the photo of the first ever heart transplant survivor. Pretty amazing. You've probably seen it. Hopefully not, but maybe. Tadeusz is holding the photo of a lifetime here. National Geographic named it the photo of the year in 1987. Probably a photo of every year, to be honest with you. In the photo, we have Dr. Religa watching his patients just moments after completing the first ever heart transplant surgery in Poland, which took 23 hours. Yeah, in the lower right corner, one of his colleagues actually fell asleep right after the surgery. It was exhausting. I couldn't even imagine. Even though the surgery was considered almost impossible at the time, they somehow did it. Dr. Religa took the chances and the patient survived. The patient actually outlived his savior, which is incredible. Honestly, if you're a doctor or nurse or anything out there, like, whoo! Shout out to all the doctors out there. Y'all are crazy. Number 8, cataract surgery. Mr. Beast, I don't know, he's saving everyone's eyes. He made everyone unblind. I didn't even know that's possible. Cataract surgery is one of the oldest surgeries in the book. And, well, rather in the painting, I should say. It was found in a tomb in ancient Egypt. It was a painting of what is surely the oldest recorded eye surgery. And it doesn't look comfortable. The painting does not look like it was a relaxing time back then. Definitely not. Scientists are able to make this conclusion due to the length of the tool that this doctor is holding. They believe this was a method called couching. Yeah, we're gonna couch your eye. The guy's like, what? What's about to happen? It's gonna be so bad, isn't it? The needle here would push the cloudy lens to the bottom of the eye, ideally fixing their vision. It's much better looking on Reddit than how I'm describing it here with this old tool. The oldest tools found in Egypt tell us that 4,000 years ago, this was the first time that it had been done. But afterwards, evidence of couching was found all over the world. It wasn't until 1747 until Jacques Daviel, doctor in France, he performed the first ever cataract extraction surgery in a modern sense, without the big scary Egyptian needle, you know, without that one. Number 7, stitches. I'm totally gonna jinx myself, but I've never broken a bone or required stitches in my life. Yeah, knock on wood. I'm on high alert all the time. That's pretty much my life. Many of my friends have gotten stitches in their lifetime. It's pretty common. Maybe odds are you've had them as well. But going back to 3000 BC, you know, ancient literature times, stitches were a little bit different. They were made from plants, like hemp, cotton, or sometimes animal tendons. Animal arteries, catgut was common. That was thread made of sheep intestines. Very fun, very gooey, going through your arms. One of the craziest ways of closing a wound back then, believe it or not, was by using ants, or an ant's head, rather. Leafcutter ants or army ants would be held against this opening, and you'd wait for a little bit until this ant spit down. Now, once it does so, you would remove the body. So, yeah, I'm sorry, ant, didn't really work out this time, but we'll keep your head for now. And the head of the ant would be stuck biting on your cut, staying there until it heals. Yeah, imagine Ant-Man shows up to save the day. He just has a pocket full of these army ants. Not what I was expecting at all. Number 6, transplantation. Blood transfusion's one thing, but how the hell do we figure out transplants, right? That's some next level stuff. Who was the first guy to try that? The first successful one was back in 1954. It was in Boston at the Peter Bent Brigham Hospital. That was like a surgical procedure. The first successful one by any means came around 1000 BC. An Indian surgeon, Samhita, had written down details on how to transplant tissue from one area of the body to repair nose injuries. So yeah, if you hurt your nose, you can take a little bit of your hip, throw it up here. Also in the Renaissance Italy in the 16th century, there was a man named Gasparo Tagliacozzi. And finally, come the 19th century, first Nobel Prize winner on work related to transplantation was French surgeon Alexis Carrel. All these people changed the medical game. They literally took the impossible. They're like, let's just put skin over here and put it over there. And it worked. Now we're doing it every day. It's crazy. In 1902, they published their work on the new techniques using new studies on animals' blood vessels, and to this day that it's still used. In 1904, they partnered with Charles Guthrie in Chicago and performed the first successful animal transplant, saving the dogs' lives. Number 5, hernia. Ooh, this one's gonna hurt. When we think of modern medical problems and their surgical fixes, it can be hard to imagine how on earth people in ancient times dealt with similar problems. And I gotta say, hernias, that's definitely on the top of the list for how they do that. Imagine the first person to get a hernia. Oh no. Egyptian pharaohs had a group of physicians who worked hard to preserve the health of their ruler. And these physicians, of course, as anyone would hope, needed to have a vast knowledge on the body and how to treat different ailments. Now, in the Egyptian tomb of Ankh-Mahor at Saqqara, which dates back to around 2500 BC, there's an illustrated sculpture of a surgeon, what is believed to be the reduction of a hernia. But it doesn't stop there as well. The mummy of Pharaoh Meneptah, as well as the mummified body of Ramses V, they both showed signs of surgery, likely an attempt to fix a hernia. And you can only imagine the tools that they used back then. Oh my gosh, I'm in pain thinking about it, actually. Number 4, mummification process. If you go to ancient Egypt and you see all these tools and artifacts, you gotta think to yourself, they actually used those back in the day. Those weird long pointy blades, yeah, it's gonna go up something you don't want it to go up. It was horrible. Many people with a limited knowledge of ancient Egypt, when they think about it, their minds go to pyramids and mummies, but really it's crazy medical knowledge. But they also thought of post-mortem dissection. You know what I mean? They also thought of mummification. They did pyramids and mummification. How they thought and did both successfully, well, we're still baffled by it. In order to mummify the body, they needed to remove any moisture from the body. This process included the removal of brain tissue, which was done through, well, quite a gruesome hook tool. It's one of those things you look through the glass and you're like, oh, that's scary. That would go in your nose to pull your brains out. It was horrible. This was not a medical practice. This was more of a spiritual one back then, so it wasn't performed by doctors, unfortunately. This is exactly why though. Although they're getting extra close and personal with a person's internal organs during this entire process, the medical information they gathered during this process was never used for medical or medical advancement, which I thought was amazing considering the tools and what we're doing with them. But at the time, that's impressive. Number 3, nose jobs. Plastic surgery is more widespread now than it ever was beforehand, and it all started, as you guessed, with the ancient Egyptians, of course, the OGs. Although, of course, not in the same way that we think it, and do it today. In the Edwin Smith Papyrus, along with the documentation of trauma surgeries, bone fractures, fixes, and all of that, the text also showed us examples of fixes for nasal injuries, which is, again, so impressive. The treatment involved manipulating the nose into the desired position before using wooden splints. You would use wooden splints, lint, swabs, and linen plugs in order to hold it in place. I mean, it's like an ancient nose job almost. That's pretty crazy. It's truly wild to think about how much the lives of these people helped shape our world today. Like they had to go through the trial phase of a nose job. You know what I mean? That's incredibly hard to imagine. While so much of the civilization remains a mystery to us, what we do know helps inform us so much today. And we can breathe better. That's great. Number 2, fire drill. And not the drill that you think. This is a much different drill. This next one here, I mean, some of these methods were incredible because they worked. Egyptian plastic surgery, stitches, these were all steps in the right direction. In 3000 BC, we had no idea what cancer was or where to even begin to solve it. Cancer is something that's obviously very prevalent in our modern society today, and because of the rising rates, it makes us ask ourselves, did cancer exist in ancient times or is this new? While they didn't call it cancer, it definitely did exist. Some of the earliest evidence evidence of cancer is found in ancient manuscripts, mummies, and fossilized bone tumors that have been found in ancient Egypt. This is a big Egypt list, I love it. There are tons of examples and different forms of cancer that have been found throughout, but perhaps the oldest comes from 3000 BC. Again, that was found in the Edwin Smith papyrus that we talked about before. In this text, it describes 8 cases of tumors or ulcers of the breast and how they treated them back then. And back then, again, it was a little different. Back then, these tumors were removed by cauterization using a tool called a fire drill. I don't know why I keep doing this, but I assume it's pretty heavy and it requires some movement like this. Other than this though, this text says in reference to the illness that there is no treatment. So yeah, thousands of years later, we're still working on it. Number 1, blood transfusion. All right, back around 70 AD, the Romans were pretty wild when it came to the Colosseum and the games that would go on. They would rush to the arena after the day and all the violence was done, not to get autographed, but to hopefully get a sip of that sweet gladiator blood. Because yeah, back then blood was considered a magical elixir. Then in the early 1500s, blood was seen as this like juice, like this youth juice that would make you young forever. I don't know. Some would drink blood as an elderly and then, well, nothing would happen because obviously. Lots of theories surrounding blood. Yeah, in the Middle Ages, bloodletting was a go-to if you were sick because they thought that your humors were out of balance. So they're like, oh, we'll just get some blood out of you. Maybe you'll feel a little bit later. Yeah, wasn't a great plan. In 1628, blood circulation was discovered by a man named William Harvey. That changed the game, of course. Now the idea of something going into your bloodstream, that was in the picture, hypothetically, almost. So we started to test this out on canines. Scientists were injecting them with different substances, and slowly but surely, that turned into our modern day blood transfusion between canines, and then eventually people. So this back in the 1660s, yeah, that's how early we started injecting things. Feels like a while ago, but it really wasn't when you think of ancient Egyptian nose jobs. You're like, oh, there's a big gap here in the medical knowledge world.
And we're starting off with this photograph of the types of cells that were used to house supposed witches during the Salem witch trials. The Salem witch trials were a very dark and infamous chapter in American history that unfolded in the late 17th century. Taking place in Salem, Massachusetts, the trials were fueled by a climate of fear, superstition, and religious fervor. Accusations of witchcraft spread like wildfire, just tearing apart families and communities. It all began when a group of young girls claimed to be afflicted by strange ailments and started pointing fingers at certain individuals as the source of their suffering, all of which were kind of outcasts in the community. And these accusations quickly snowballed. It led to mass hysteria and just a frenzy of trials. The accused were subjected to flawed and biased legal proceedings. Evidence and confessions were obtained under duress and were deemed admissible, and 19 innocent people were ultimately convicted and put to death. Historical documents and illustrations related to the Salem witch trials were often concealed by authorities, seeking to downplay the events and distance themselves from the mass hysteria that was going on at the time. At number 9, we have Pope Pius XII's secret wartime documents. These documents, which were previously hidden within the Vatican's secret archives, were released in 2020, and they reveal some pretty intriguing stuff about the Vatican during World War II and the Pope's relationship with the leader of the Third Reich. These documents, spanning loads of pages, give us a peek behind the curtain, if you will, of Pope Pius's actions during one of the darkest times in history. People were hoping for some concrete answers about the Pope's stance during this time, but it turns out it's a bit of a mixed bag. Apparently there's no definitive evidence in these documents that he actively denounced the actions of the Third Reich, or was at least doing enough to try and help the people. And as it turns out, he even had contact with Mr. H himself. There is also some evidence, of course, he was working behind the scenes to try and aid in the war effort, but historians and scholars are having just a field day with this treasure trove of information, trying to uncover the truth about the Vatican's role in those tumultuous times. At number 8, we have Anneliese Michel. Most of you have probably seen this image before. It's incredibly harrowing, really sticks with you. No amount of horror movie makeup can replicate just how disturbing the image of this poor woman is. The case of Anneliese is a haunting and very tragic tale that unfolded in the 1970s. Anneliese, a young German woman, experienced a series of alarming physical and psychological symptoms that were eventually attributed to demonic possession. Convinced that she was possessed by demons, Anneliese and her family sought help from both medical professionals and the Catholic Church. Unfortunately, her pleas for assistance were met with a blend of misguided religious fervor and a lack of appropriate medical intervention. Anneliese's condition just deteriorated rapidly, and she endured months of grueling exorcism rituals performed by 2 priests. The sessions were physically and mentally tortuous, with Anneliese being subjected to restraints, being denied food, and enduring countless hours of psychological torment. Although there are also stories about her even outright denying food herself, so there was definitely stuff going on here within her brain that just wasn't being properly diagnosed. Throughout this chain of sad events, Anneliese's health worsened. She became emaciated and weakened. The tragedy lies not only in this immense suffering Anneliese endured, but also in the lack of proper intervention. The case raised important questions about the kind of intersection of religion and mental health. It really highlights the danger of neglecting evidence-based medical treatment in favor of superstition. At number 7 on the list, we have a bit of a different one. These are documents and possible images that have been successfully hidden in the Vatican Apostolic Archive, formerly called the Vatican Secret Archive, which I like way better. I love the word secret is actually in the title. I didn't just add it for dramatic effect. We don't just hold archives here. These are secret archives. Anyway, this vast repository located within the walls of Vatican City houses an extensive collection of historical documents spanning centuries. While the term secret may imply sinister activities, the archive's purpose, as it's said, is primarily to preserve and protect sensitive or confidential material related to the Catholic Church. But there's definitely an allure about the unknown, and it's fueled various theories about the existence of possibly dark secrets concealed within those walls. Some speculate that the archive may contain controversial documents related to the church's historical controversies, like the Inquisition, the Crusades, and, as discussed earlier, some stuff about the role of the church during World War II, which came out fairly recently. Others propose that it holds hidden knowledge about the existence of maybe extraterrestrial life or ancient relics that challenge the established religious narratives, but hey, who knows? Next on the list, we have St. Joseph's Orphanage in Vermont. So we have a number of images from inside the walls of this notorious orphanage. They do have a certain old photograph creepiness about them, but for the most part, they're pretty innocuous, but it's the context behind these seemingly innocent photographs that makes them so uncomfortable to look at. Behind the doors of this orphanage were countless instances of mistreatment. Mistreatment is really putting it lightly. It was outright horrific what went on here, and when over 100 former residents of the orphanage came forward to make statements about how they had suffered as children in the facility, no charges were made, and the church had turned a blind eye to the cruelty the residents experienced at the hands of the nuns who ran it. The list of crimes committed are just too long to list, but it's so bad that there were actually children who lost their lives at this place, and not by accident. Some were pushed off boats. There's other stories about instances of being pushed out windows by nuns. It's infuriating hearing what went on here. This next image was an engraving by Bernard Picart, a draftsman, illustrator, and engraver from the early 18th century. This image here is his depiction of a torture chamber of the Spanish Inquisition. We see supposed heretics being suspended by ropes. One man has his feet being held to a fire. Picart created a body of work that challenged the religious norms of his time. His art often depicted religious subjects in unconventional ways that questioned the dogma upheld by the Catholic Church at the time. Picard's approach was met with disapproval a lot of the time and condemnation from the Church, who considered his interpretations as blasphemous or heretical. But his willingness to depict religious figures and stories in a critical light led to his work being looked down upon and criticized by the Church. Up next, we have this image. This is Dennis Rader, someone who upstanding members of the Christian faith would not be proud to learn that he is indeed a believer. Dennis Rader was a notorious American serial killer who terrorized the community of Wichita, Kansas from 1974 to 1991. What made Rader's case particularly chilling was the stark contrast between his heinous crimes and his seemingly normal everyday life. At the time of his arrest in 2005, it was revealed that Rader had served as a church leader, contributing to his image as this upstanding member of society. He was an active member of the Lutheran Church, holding positions such as president of the church council and leader of the Boy Scouts. Rader's role as a church leader and this image he upheld as being this dedicated member of his community only made it more of a shock when he was found out about his crimes. This guy, just an absolute monster. He did some incredibly twisted things that I just can't go into detail here, but just a reminder that no matter how decent people seem on the outside, there could be something much darker going on behind closed doors. Not trying to say you shouldn't trust anybody, just, keep your eyes peeled. Don't be too trusting. At number 3, we have the Salem UFO sighting. This photo may not look all that spectacular compared to some of the actual footage we've seen of possible UFOs today, but just keep in mind that this photo was taken in 1952. It wasn't doctored, and these mysterious glowing lights in the sky have never been explained. Photo was snapped by Coast Guard Officer Shell Alpert in Salem, Massachusetts. What makes this image really stand out is just how clear it is. It's not blurry, it's very obvious that there are 4 glowing discs hovering in the air. Now, in terms of why the church would have tried to hide an image like this, maybe people starting to believe in the presence of extraterrestrial life would have gone against what the Bible laid out. Really, I just put this one on here because it's an intriguing photograph. Number 2, let's change gears for a minute and take a look at a fairly recent image that made headlines when it was first shared on social media back in 2017. It didn't make headlines on major publications or anything, but it was all over the internet at the time. This image looks to be some sort of large winged thing. The picture was taken in Phoenix, Arizona by Richard Christensen, who's just as confused as everyone else as to what he captured on camera. Some said it resembled Mothman, but others said that this shadowy figure resembled an angel or even possibly a demon. Definitely looks more like a harbinger of doom to me. Of course, it could just be a trick of the camera or just an outright hoax, but I think it's a pretty eerie looking photo. And coming in at number 1 is William Tyndale. This image depicts the termination of William Tyndale, who was burned at the stake for doing what, you might ask? Turns out it's translating the Bible into English. As it turns out, what the Catholic Church was trying to hide here was actually the Bible itself. At least they wanted to keep it out of the hands of everyday people, anyway, which they believed would undermine their power. Tyndale believed that the Bible should be accessible to the common people in their own language, challenging the church's monopoly on biblical interpretation. His translation work, particularly the New Testament, faced opposition from religious authorities who sought to maintain control over religious teachings. The church considered Tyndale's translation as heretical, as it was in direct opposition to their authority, and his efforts were met with resistance, and he was ultimately arrested in 1535. In 1536, he was sentenced for heresy. He was sentenced and condemned to death by strangulation before being burned at the stake.
Number 10. Mount Pony. In 1969, the Federal Reserve built a 400-foot-long bunker in Virginia with steel reinforced concrete over a foot thick. It is also covered by multiple feet of dirt and surrounded by fences and guard posts. The computers within the facility are the central node for all American electric money transfers. Until the 1990s, it also served as an extra government facility. For many years after its creation, it stored around $1 billion to rebuild the American economy if it ever fell to a nuclear attack. Currently, it stores the archive of movies from the Library of Congress, but because of it being hardened against nuclear attack, many people believe that the facility is sitting ready to be used in a time of need. The government tries to prevent any photos of the facility being placed online, as having the layout of the facility become public knowledge would remove any secrecy and advantage in the future. Only a few photos of it can be found online, and they honestly look straight out of the back rooms. Number 9. Maid of Harlech. While secret government facilities are one thing, it can be hard to believe that it's illegal to photograph something that you might just stumble upon on an afternoon walk. A plane that was nicknamed the Maid of Harlech crashed off the coast of Wales back in September of 1942. The pilot lost control during a training exercise and the plane crashed, though the pilot did walk away in pretty good shape. The plane is under around 2 meters of water and only becomes visible when the tide conditions are just right. The wreckage has never moved in all this time, and while its actual location is kept under wraps, it is in a public area that we assume anybody can access. However, you may find yourself in some legal trouble if you saw it and try to take a photo of it. The Protection of Military Remains Act prevents the location of any military remains being publicly shared, so any photos of the plane that give away its location are quickly removed from the internet and are not allowed to be seen. Number 8. Tiananmen Square. While this image is not forbidden for the majority of us to look at, it is forbidden for around 1.5 billion people. In 1989, student-led demonstrations in support of democracy took place in Tiananmen Square in China, the protesters attempting to stop military movement on the location. The government of China then declared martial law, and they used their military alongside massive tanks to run down any protesters that tried to remain in the square. Because of the horrific nature of the event, the Chinese government has attempted to cover up the fact that the event in 1989 ever happened. Every year on the anniversary, they undertake a massive censorship campaign to ensure that nobody is talking about the event. Many people in the country have no idea that it ever even happened, but we have access to one of the most infamous images from the event, a protester standing in front of an advancing tank. While we can view it whenever we like, people in China are strictly punished if they ever even speak of what happened. Number 7. North Korea. Similarly to the censorship that takes place in China, North Korea often covers up the reality of what goes on in their country. But while they do hide it from their own citizens, they also hide it from any outsiders who may try to get a peek at how the country operates. Information going in and out of the country is strictly controlled to maintain their image, so if you ever want to visit, you'll probably have a pretty difficult time. Anyone who wants to enter the country must be accompanied by an escort, and you are only allowed to see pre-approved parts of the country, which are typically staged in order to look much better than the reality. While you may be allowed to photograph these areas, photographs of anything else will be destroyed and could land you in pretty serious trouble. The main thing they want to avoid anyone seeing is the major poverty in the country, with most families actually undertaking very hard labor jobs. There are also other rules, like how you are not allowed to photograph a statue from behind, so if you do manage to get one of these pictures, you're very lucky and very brave. Number 6. Iranian missile launch. One of the main things that governments all across the world like to cover up is their military power. They don't want you to know just how much power they're packing until it's already too late. In 2019, the Iranian government was conducting a missile test launch that went terribly wrong. It resulted in a large explosion that destroyed the whole facility they were operating out of. This occurred when tensions between Iran and the rest of the world were at an all-time high. So Donald Trump, of course, tweeted out a satellite image of the testing site. While it may seem like a normal picture, the United States military became furious and wished that the photo had never been released. This is because of just how clear it is. They didn't want people knowing the extent of just how powerful their satellite cameras are. From the image alone, people were able to find out the location and name of the satellite that took the photo. The government attempted to redact the image and prevent any more people from seeing it, but it was on Twitter and it was already too late. Number 5. Area 51. Area 51, the infamous government base in Nevada, was not even publicly confirmed by the government to exist until 2013. Honestly, way more recently than I thought it was. They stated that it was a military testing site, but a majority of the public believe that it's home to aliens and all evidence thereof. Because of the maintained secrecy surrounding the base, you are not allowed to fly in their airspace, and any pictures of the facility are pretty strictly prohibited. However, in 2020, one pilot managed to lie their way into getting the most up-close and clear footage of the facility like ever. In 2020, the private pilot named Gabriel managed to gain access to restricted airspace by telling them he just wanted to continue his quick route to the airport, them not knowing he was equipped with his GoPro to capture footage of the secret facility. He states how he didn't see any activity around the base, but we are fortunate enough to have the images that show even more of the base's layout, while the government is probably not too happy about the fact that this footage even exists. Number 4. Ayi Arnagari. It is a military base in Greece that they seem fully determined to cover up and prevent anyone from knowing anything about it. While you can use Google Earth to see an aerial image of just about anywhere on the planet, there are a few areas that are blurred from your view, and this military base is one of them. It's located in central Athens, and while you can see the building that surrounds it, the full complex is completely pixelated and blurred out. Basically, all images and information about the facility is kept under wraps by the government. Some people believe that it's a military training facility for new recruits, but could also be their military command headquarters. Photos from ground level or of anyone entering or exiting the facility are strictly prohibited. Number 3. Pine Gap. The United States government has multiple facilities that are used for collecting and storing secret intelligence. The Pentagon is probably the most well-known one. However, how publicly known the Pentagon is could be on purpose to distract from the other intelligence facilities that they're trying to hide from the public. One lesser known one is the Pine Gap surveillance facility that is located in Australia, a crucial base for the United States surveillance of Asia. Because of its importance, they do everything they can to prevent any images of the base making it into public hands. This is because they don't want any information of its layout, operations, or abilities to be known by enemy states and the people that they are collecting information on. Unfortunately for them, it is still possible for the public to actually get pretty close to it, so there are a few images that can be found of the outside. Number 2. X-37 space plane. The United States military is constantly testing and experimenting with new things, and one of the main things that they have tried to improve in the past is military air travel. Obviously, they wouldn't want any information about these new things to get leaked, with the fear it may end up in enemy hands. One of their most secretive designs ever was the X-37 space plane, and it landed at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, the government attempting to prevent any images of this event being leaked. It's an autonomously piloted space plane and was landing there after completing a 2-year mission in orbit, 2 of them apparently being in service. While we do have pictures of what it looks like, its purpose and what technology and capabilities it has remains under wraps. Because of how secretive the government has been with this potential new spy plane, the images that we do have of it are pretty rare, and they're not too happy about the fact that we have them. Number 1. Leaked military hardware. The United States government aren't the only ones who have had leaks of experimental military equipment. The Chinese military also had a similar situation occur, except they accidentally leaked it all on their own. In their magazine titled Modern Ships, they included an image of the new H-6N bomber. While it was purposeful to show off the ship, they didn't intend to show off the new design of the large projectile attached to the bottom of it, experts believing it was built to help with China's territory disputes. As soon as they realized what they'd done, the publishers retracted the image, but it was too late and it was already out there. So they tried to claim it was a computer-generated error, but more pictures leaked online of the actual jet in operation operation, matching the image in the magazine. The images hit the internet and they lost all hopes of trying to cover it up.
In our number 10 spot, we have the Moko Mokai collection. Well, we are starting off strong with a truly scary and disturbing photo. This is a photograph of a man named Major General Horatio Gordon Robley, who had a collection of 35 heads that he stole from the native Maori people. Apparently in New Zealand, there were people called Maori that preserved the heads of fallen people. The heads were chopped off, boiled, smoked, dried in the sun, and then dipped in a shark oil before being displayed like a trophy. Whoa. They are known as the Moko Mokai. Anyways, these heads were robbed by the British when they moved into New Zealand, and this pic is one of the guys who stole them. Honestly, the man feels just as chilling to look at as the heads. Does anyone else agree? It's probably because he's holding something that looks like it could be a sharp object that might have helped in the chopping process. I don't know, could be just me. In our number 9 spot, we have the woman in the attic. Well, the story behind this picture is extremely chilling, so chilling that I definitely threw on some show tunes and sang for a moment after reading about it. In case you're curious, Wicked is always my musical of choice. Speaking of Wicked, this was not planned, I swear. The woman in this photograph is a real woman who had a wicked mother who locked her in an attic for 25 years. An anonymous tip to the authorities in 1901 was how she was found, 55 pounds in a room filled with feces, old meat, and insects. Thankfully, she was okay health-wise, but mentally, as you can expect, not so much. This is a photo of her and how she was found. Truly horrible to see. While looking at this photograph and seeing her long brown hair, I'm now convinced that this is where Disney got some of their inspiration for the movie Tangled. There are way too many similarities that I'm sure they took and made 1,000 times more light and cheery. In our number 8 spot, we have For Sale. This is a photograph from 1948 that honestly at first glance I thought it to be some kind of joke. Maybe the young ones in the photograph were being bad and the mom was threatening to sell them. You know, the old tricks parents would play when children's aid wasn't a phone call away. Anyways, apparently this is a picture of something very real that was happening due to poverty at the time, and that instantly makes the picture chilling and sad. Apparently the mother and father of these young ones, Mr. and Mrs. Chalifo, needed money desperately, and so they sold them. It was said that the mother was paid to stage this photo, and perhaps that is why there is an air of phoniness to it, but no later than 2 years after all of their young ones had been sold to families. In our number 7 spot, we have On the Brink of Death. A man by the name of Robert Overacker decided that he wanted to raise awareness for the homeless. And how was he going to do it? Oh, by doing a stunt that would attract the masses. He was going to jet ski over Niagara Falls. And this is a picture of him doing just that. This was the last picture of him taken as he fell to his death, as his parachute did not open as planned. Apparently one of the police officers at the Niagara area has said that it would have been like hitting cement as he fell 180 feet. Wow. What a haunting photo to look at. He was only 39 as well. This is why I will never skydive because, well, there isn't a 100% survival rate, so there's that. Also, I'm a chicken, so there's also that. In our number 6, we have the two-headed dog. I always feel like puking when I see this photo. It is just the most inhumane thing ever, and it makes my heart hurt to look at. This is a photo that was taken in the 50s of the Soviet scientist Vladimir Demikov and his science experiment, the two-headed dog. He beheaded the head off of one of the dogs and attached it to the other dog. He sewed their circulatory systems together and connected their vertebrae with plastic strings, and after the surgery was completed, both of the heads could hear, see, smell, and act as a normal dog would. The dog survived only 4 days before passing away. This scientist's research led to the creation of transplants, but wow, was this a horrible thing to have done. Also, he apparently only did this experiment due to boredom, so perhaps my anger stems from having learned that. In our number 5 spot, we have Mary Reeser. This is a picture of a blown up Mary Reeser. This picture showcased quite the story from its time. On July the 2nd of 1951 in St. Petersburg, Florida, a woman by the name of Mary Reeser somehow caught fire, and all that remained was a part of her skull and her left leg surrounded by her ashes. She was discovered by her landlady, and after the investigation, the police were unable to say as to how she could have possibly caught fire. It was this story where the idea of spontaneous human combustion was theorized, but scientists today say that they are almost certain that this could not be the case. But what is weird is that most of her house was largely devoid of fire damage, so it makes no sense. I suppose we shall never know, and this picture will continue to scare us till the end of time. In our number 4 spot, we have the truck stop killer. In the 70s, there was a killer by the name of Robert Ben Rhodes who would pick up while he was driving his commercial truck across America, and then he would kill them. He was suspected to have taken the life of over 50 women. Anyways, when he was finally caught, a picture of a named Regina K. Walters was found along with many other photos of women inside Robert's home. This photo is believed to be taken right before he killed Regina. Man, oh man, how horrible. This is quite chilling to look at. Sometimes I'm so surprised when evidence like this is leaked to the public. This must have been haunting for her family and friends to see. In our number 3 spot, we have the Radium Girls. This is another chilling photo of a girl that was a part of the Radium Girls, which were a number of women known for working at factories in the 20s where they were exposed to so much radium that they actually would come home glowing in the dark. Unfortunately, the prolonged exposure caused them to have a series of problems, such as their jaws began to swell up and fell off, their vertebrae would collapse, and eventually they passed of cancer. So knowing that this is a pic of one of those women makes this picture so much worse than it looks. However, it does already look like a scary picture of a woman in pain. Pretty scary to think about the amount of people working in factories today or working with technology that might bring about future death that we haven't been able to predict yet. In our number 2 spot, we have Annalise Michel. Yeah, this picture will definitely give you the heebie-jeebies even without knowing the backstory. But what if I told you that this is a pic of a woman that was believed to be possessed by the devil? Yeah, this photo just got 100 times scarier, didn't it? Yeah, well, this is a photo of a young lady by the name of Annalise, and she was a pretty devout Catholic German and grew up in the 60s. She was completely normal until she suddenly started hallucinating, eating spiders, routinely convulsing, and just drinking her own urine. She claimed that the devil was possessing her, and she would later go on to have 67 exorcisms. Nothing worked, and she ended up passing away from malnutrition at the age of 23. Her tale is what inspired the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Yep, deeply chilling. In our number 1 spot, we have the Pioneer's Defense. Save the best for last. This is probably one of the creepiest photos that I have ever seen. This is a historical image taken by the Russian photographer Viktor Bula in 1937. If it isn't creepy enough without the explanation, here's the explanation. These are people that were part of a Soviet youth group called the Young Pioneers, and they are wearing gas masks because they were in the middle of a military preparation drill, as this was during a time when Joseph Stalin was the dictator and no one knew if death was around the corner. Yikes. Sometimes I am so thankful to be alive right now. Even though it does seem as if we're going through a bit of a mental war in this day and age, a physical war is way scary to think about being a part of.
Coming in at number 9, remains of an astronaut. Infamously known as the man who fell from space, Vladimir Komarov was a famous Russian astronaut, or cosmonaut as they were called, during the Cold War space race. In 1967, he embarked on a crazy mission that, although he was completely trained to complete, was ultimately rushed. Allegedly, the spacecraft had a multitude of structural issues, and despite engineers warning the Soviet officials that the craft was not ready, facility, they continued with the mission as planned. So Vladimir took off and made his way up into the eternity of space and even executed 16 orbits around Earth. But along the line, something went awry with his mission, so he was instructed to make his way back down to Earth. However, things went south upon trying to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere when his parachute would not engage, and Vladimir plummeted back towards the Earth, crashing in a horrific explosion. Rumor has it that while he was plummeting to his fate, he was screaming at the Soviets for forcing him to do this mission. All that remained of him is what you see here. Next up at number 8, radium girls. After its discovery in 1898, radium quickly became one of the hottest things on the market. By 1914, the United States Radium Corporation began developing a special glow-in-the-dark paint using radium, which was mainly used for watches they would send off to soldiers during the war. However, the corruption began after they started hiring young female workers to use said paint to make these radium dials, but despite having an understanding of the harm it could inflict, they did nothing to warn these women, nor did they provide them physical protection from the substance. In fact, they actually assured them that the paint was harmless, and more so, instructed the women to make a point out of the brushes with their lips to keep the fine tip for the watches. So the women in each facility began unknowingly ingesting copious amounts of radium, and the process became known as lip dip paint. And some of the girls even began to paint their fingernails, face, and teeth with the stuff, as once again, they had been told it was completely harmless. However, as we know now, that was far from the case, and tragically, many of these radium girls, as they were later coined, either died from the exposure or at the very least suffered extensive poisoning. Tragically, little did the women in this photo know they were already dying a slow and painful death. Coming in at number 7, Mary Reeser. On the morning of July 2nd, 1951, in St. Petersburg, Florida, Mary Reeser's landlady went up to the old woman's apartment to deliver a telegram. But upon her arrival, noticed something strange, that her door was warm to the touch. Still, she opened it nervously, and to her horror, she found Mary almost completely reduced to a pile of ashes on her chair, with only a small part of her left leg and her shockingly shrunken skull remaining. But what exactly happened to Mary? Well, that's kind of the million-dollar question. Local authorities were unable to determine the cause of the fire, as the rest of the apartment was relatively unscathed. And when the FBI became involved, they determined Mary had essentially gone up in flames like the wick of a candle, while her own body fat fed the flame. But still, the question of how the fire started in the first place remained unanswered. Often referred to as the Cinder Lady, there was a theory at the time that Mary suffered spontaneous human combustion, but whatever it was that happened certainly left a terrifying crime scene. Coming in at number 6, 19th century cure for mental illness. Over the years, there have been countless terrible ideas related to the cure for mental illness. In the early to mid 1900s, for example, the lobotomy was a popular method to fix the issue. At other points in time, they believed removing a part of the skull could do the trick. Prior to this, it was common practice to generate a near-death incident like drowning, while of course back before the idea of depression or other mental illnesses were truly understood as a concept, it was believed to be a demon, and a good old exorcism was the way to go. However, there is one practice I had never even heard of until I saw this photo from 1890. As you can see here, this photo shows a woman being held up in a sort of crucifix pose and forced to face a wall. And after doing a bit of deep diving, it turns out this was a pretty standard practice in mental institutions in the 19th century. At the time, it was believed that this could cure what they referred to as insanity, although I don't know how any of these people thought forcing someone to stand while being chained up and staring into nothingness was going to help them feel better. I mean, if I didn't know any better, I would think this was some kind of evil prisoner. Just goes to show how corrupt and cruel asylums were back in the day. Coming in at number 5, the last public guillotine. I don't know about you, but I am always shocked when I remember that the last public execution via guillotine was in 1939. It just feels so medieval that I can't believe there are people alive today who could have witnessed such a thing happen. The man facing his death was named Eugene Weidman, and to be fair, he was no peach. Convicted for kidnapping and killing multiple men and women, but even so, it's wild to me that this photo is less than 85 years old. According to news articles from the time, the crowd went wild when he was brought out of the prison and towards the giant blade. Observers were reportedly hooting, hollering, and whistling during the event, even going so far as to dab up the dead man's blood with their handkerchiefs as a souvenir. After the event, authorities decided that what had long been intended to serve as a deterrent for bad behavior had turned into a rowdy, gladiator-type fest, and so France ultimately decided to outlaw public execution entirely. And speaking of people we know that witnessed such things, famous actor Christopher Lee, who played Saruman in Lord of the Rings, was apparently at this very execution. Coming in at number 4, hotel manager. At first glance, it's a bit tricky to tell what's going on in this photo. However, after doing a bit of searching around, the story behind it all is much darker than meets the eye. Taken during the civil rights movement of the 1960s, this image you are seeing here shows a group of both black and white folks enjoying a dip in the pool while the hotel manager is pouring some kind of liquid into the water. Now, before I get into what's happening in this photo, let me first explain what happened 7 days prior. So remember, at this time, segregation was still in full swing, and this hotel was whites only. Reportedly, a week before this photo was taken, Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested for trespassing at this very hotel after being asked to leave from its segregated restaurant. Now, there were some people staying at this hotel who, rightfully so, thought this was not okay, and so the white guests invited black people to join them in the pool as their guests in an attempt to protest the segregation of the facility. However, the manager, Jimmy Brock, was not a fan of this protest, and in this photo here, you'll see he's pouring a bottle of hydrochloric acid into the pool to scare away the swimmers. Again, just another thing to add to the long list of atrocities committed to people of color in our world. Coming in at number 3, Blanche Monnier. Born in 1849, Blanche Monnier was a well-respected French socialite from a conservative bourgeoisie family. Acclaimed for astounding beauty, by her early 20s there were plenty of suitors who fancied her hand, and by 1876, at the age of 27, she finally found a man who she wished to marry. However, the man in question, a penniless lawyer, was not to her mother's liking, and so in a fit of disapproval, her mother decided to lock her daughter in a tiny dark room in the attic of their home, where poor Blanche remained hidden from sunlight and humanity for the next 25 years of her life. Now, beyond the obviously awful parts about this decision, her mother spent the next 25 years claiming her daughter was missing, playing the victim of a mourning mother. Meanwhile, with the help of her son and Blanche's brother Marcel, let her daughter literally rot, starve, and go mad in isolation. That was until May of 1901, when the Paris Attorney General received an anonymous letter revealing the location and depravity of Madame Monnier's prisoner, and when the police arrived, they couldn't believe their eyes. As you can see in this photo, Blanche was in an unrecognizable state, covered in rotten food, her own feces, and weighing a mere 50 pounds. Police said the stench in that room was so vile they could barely stay long enough to get her out of there. In the end, Blanche was taken to live the rest of her life in a facility as she suffered extreme mental health disorders from the cruelties she experienced, though sadly justice was never really served. Her mother died shortly after she was found, and her brother was acquitted, as at the time, duty to rescue was not a part of the penal code. Coming in at number 2, rings. Starting in 1933 up until the end of World War II, we are all very well aware that the evil German party operated more than 1,000 camps and inflicted some of the most cruel, inhumane, and diabolical acts on millions of prisoners, especially targeting the Jewish population. Now, while this is by no means the most awful photo depicting this period in time, it does, however, showcase the gravity in a new light. This photo, dating back to May 5th, 1945, shortly after the defeat of the dictatorship, US troops stumbled across this giant box of wedding wedding rings, prisoners were forced to remove so that the party could repurpose the high-quality gold. Among these rings, they also found watches, eyeglasses, gold fillings that would have been extracted from the prisoners' teeth, and precious stones. And so while this photo may look rather innocent compared to some of the others on this list, it is in fact anything but. And last up in our number 1 spot, human zoos. It's no secret that humanity has done some incredibly messed up and cruel things through the years. War, genocide, slavery, to name a few. However, this photo dating back to 1904 shows yet another mind-boggling atrocity. As you can see, this photo shows what used to be an actual attraction at the Coney Island Zoo in the early 20th century. Imprisoned Filipino people, which is beyond disgusting. Apparently these attractions began in the late 19th century and were very popular up until the mid-1950s, as the Western world was desperate to see what at the time was viewed as a primitive and savage lifestyle. I know, it's gross. This one in particular was reportedly intended to show off the fact that the US had recently claimed the Philippines, and visitors would come by to watch the prisoners inside while throwing peanuts at them. Now, I should clarify, it was not just Coney Island doing this. Zoos containing captured indigenous peoples from Asian and African countries were very popular in other countries like France, England, Spain, Italy, as well as the United States. But either way, it's beyond revolting that this was a thing to begin with, let alone that it went on for so long.